Today, Nebo TV is going to be diving into the relationship between Africa and the world's most technical know-how country, China. Sino-Africa, which refers to the historical, cultural, social, political, military relationship between China and Africa.
China and Africa have a history of trade relations, sometimes through the third parties, dating back as far as 202 BC and 220 AD. The first mention of Africa in Chinese source was the Yunyang Tusa by Tuan Chashi, a compendium of general knowledge, where he wrote about the land of the Popali, referring to Somalia. In the 14th century, Moroccan traveler and scholar Ibn Battuta made a long journey to Africa and Asia. He reached China in April 1345 after a stay in India, before serving as an envoy of Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq of the Indian Tughlaq dynasty to China. He wrote that China is the safest, best regulated of countries for a traveler. A man may go by himself on a 9-month journey, carrying with him a large sum of money without any fear.
There are some accounts which mentioned Chinese ship sinking in Lamu Island in Kenya in 1415. Survivors of the sinking ship were said to have settled down in the island and married local women.
Archaeologists have found Chinese porcelains made during the Tang Dynasty in 618 to 907 in Kenyan villages. However, these were believed to have been brought over by Zhang He during his 15th century ocean voyages on Lamu Island off Kenyan coast. Local oral tradition maintains that 20 shipwrecked Chinese sailors, possibly part of the Zhang's fleet, washed up on shores there hundreds of years ago, giving permission to settle by local tribes after having killed a dangerous python. They converted to Islam and married local women. Now they are believed to have just 6 descendants left there. In 2002, DNA test conducted on one of the women confirmed that she was of Chinese descent. Her daughter, Mawamaka Sharifu, later received a PRC government scholarship to study traditional Chinese medicine in China. National Geographic also published an article by Frank Viviano in July 2005. He visited Pate Island during the time he stayed on Lamu. Ceramic fragments had been found around Lamu, which the administrative officer of the local Swahili History Museum claimed were of Chinese origin, specifically from Zhang He's voyage to East Africa. The eyes of the Pate people resembled Chinese, and Famo and Wei were some of the names among them which were speculated to be of Chinese origin. Their ancestors were said to be from indigenous women who intermarried with Chinese-made sailors when they were shipwrecked. 2 places on Pate were called Old Shanghai and New Shanghai, which the Chinese sailors had named. A local guide who claimed descendant from the Chinese showed Frank a graveyard made of coral on the island, indicating that they were graves of the Chinese sailors, which the author described as virtually identical to Chinese Ming Dynasty tombs, complete with half-moon domes and terraced entities. Zhou Elia made a 10-country tour to Africa between December 1963 and January 1964. Zhou Elia visited Ghana and established close relations with Kwame Nkrumah, who desired a united Africa. Relations at that time were often reflects of China's foreign policy in general. China began to cultivate ties and offer economic, technical, and military support to African countries and liberation movements in an effort to encourage war of national liberation and revolution as part of an international united front against both superpowers. China had also supported Africa during its struggle against European colonialism.
The establishment of modern Sino-Africa began in the late 1950s when China signed a bilateral trade agreement with some African countries like Egypt, Angola, Somalia, Guinea, Morocco, and Sudan.
To protect its investment and cement its geopolitical rise, China has opened its first military base in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. Political scientists are of the view that this move marks a new phase in Sino-Africa relations. The opening of the first Chinese military base in Africa in the summer of 2017 heralded a new era for the Chinese foreign policy. China's economic and political ambitions continue to grow. The Djibouti base is based to help in the maintenance of continental peace and security where necessary. The world enhanced Beijing's continued growth around the world, Africa in particular, where China has become the continent's largest trading partner.
China also goes beyond to have military relationship with some African countries. Their military cooperation dated back to the period of Cold War, when China was keen to help the African liberation movement.
China also had military ties with non-allied countries such as Egypt. Military equipment worth $142 million was sold to African countries between 1955 and 1977, 2 decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Military relations are now based on business interests rather than ideology. More recently, China has sent troops to the continent to participate in peacemaking. Apart from peacemaking, China provides military training and equipment to a few countries, though this does not require military forces to be deployed. China's latest military efforts are to combat terrorist radicalism and not the local African conflicts. China strongly supported African independence movements and gave aid to newly independent African nations in the 1960s.
Since 1997, several African heads have visited the People's Republic of China. The Ministerial Meeting Forum of China-Africa Cooperation was held in October 2000 in Beijing. This was the first collective dialogue between the PRC and the African nations. Africa is the host of 3 Chinese cultural centers, which promotes the Chinese culture and language.
The first overseas Chinese center was opened in Mauritius in 1988. 2 others followed in Egypt and Benin. The Confucius Institute, which focuses on the promotion of the Chinese language and culture, has 20 centers distributed around 13 African countries. Historically, little is known about early African migration to China. As economic and political ties have strengthened, many Africans have relocated to China seeking better economic opportunities. Places dubbed Little Africa and Chocolate City are increasingly receiving new migrants, mostly Nigerians. Most of the African migrants are concentrated in the area of Guangzhou, with an estimated number of 20,000.
Early modern bilateral trade were mainly affected by the Cold War and communist ideology.
China had originally had close ties with anti-apartheid and liberation movement African National Congress (ACN) in South Africa, but as China's relation with the Soviet Union worsened and the ACN moved closer to the Soviet Union, China shifted away from the ACN towards the Pan-Africanist Congress. The Soviets supported Joshua Nkomo's Zimbabwe's African People's Union and supplied them with arms. Robert Mugabe's attempts to gain Soviet support for his Zimbabwe African National Union, but were rebuffed, leading him to enter into relations with China. China adopted several principles, among them supporting the independence of African countries while investing in infrastructural projects. In 1970s, the expulsion of the military advisor from Egypt and Sudan was welcomed and arms supplies by China. China and Zaire shared a common goal in Africa, namely doing things in their power to halt Soviet gains in the area. According to both Zaire and China, covertly funneled aid to the FNLA and later the UNTA in order to prevent the MPLA, who were supported and augmented by Cuba, from coming to power. China and Safari Club sent assistance to support the Mobutu regime during the Shaba I conflict, 1977. The Somalia Democratic Republic established good relations with the Soviet Union throughout the Cold War era. When the Somalia sought to create a Greater Somalia, it declared war on Ethiopia. With the aid of the Soviet Union, Somalia took the Ogaden region in 3 months. But the Soviet Union shifted its support from Somalia to Ethiopia, and Ethiopia retook the Ogaden region. This angered Siad Barre and expelled all Soviet advisors and citizens from Somalia. China and Safari Club supported Somalia diplomatically and with token military aid.
Over the years, several African countries have had lots of economic relations with China. In 1980, the total bilateral trade of Sino-Africa was $1 billion.
In 1999, it was $6.5 billion, and in 2000, it was $10 billion. By 2005, the total Sino-African trade has reached $39.7 billion, before it jumped to $55 billion in 2006, making China the second largest trade partner of Africa after the United States, which had trade worth of $91 billion with African nations. The People's Republic of China also passed the traditional African economic partner and former colonial power France, which had trade worth $47 billion. In 2010, trade between Africa and China was worth $114 billion, and in 2011, $166.3 billion. In the first 10 months of 2012, it was $163.9 billion. There are an estimated 800 Chinese corporations doing business in Africa, most of which are private companies investing in infrastructure, energy, and banking sectors. Investment from China entrepreneurial migration have culminated in positive and negative effects in local African societies. Unconditional and low-rate credit lines have taken the place of more restricted and conditional Western loans since 2000. More than $10 billion in debt owed by African nations to the PRC has been cleared.
Since 1960s, Chinese has engaged in a kind of healthy diplomacy towards African countries.
Healthcare development and medical assistance have been one of the main successful areas of cooperation between the early 1960s and 2005. More than 15,000 Chinese doctors traveled to Africa to help treat patients in more than 47 countries. The medical teams have treated more than 170 million patients during the same period. In 2001, the member nations of G8 formed the United Nations-backed Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, with an initial budget of $10 billion. In 2007, another additional $1.1 billion was approved in Kunming, China, of which 66% was dedicated to Africa. In September in the same year, China promised the Democratic Republic of the Congo to build 31 hospitals units and 145 smaller healthcare centers, a project due to be completed in March 2010, which is already completed as at today.
One-third of Chinese oil supply was from Africa, mainly from Angola. Investment Chinese companies in the sector of energy have drastically increased in recent years.
In some cases, like in Nigeria and Angola, oil and gas exploration and production deals reach more than $2 billion. Many of those investments are mixed packages of aid and loan in exchange for infrastructure building and trade deals. In agriculture, Benin and Sahel countries of Burkina Faso and Mali supplies up to 20% of China's cotton needs, while Côte d'Ivoire supplies China with cocoa. Large shipments of coffee are imported from Kenya. As for fish products, Namibia remains one of the main providers.
Specifically in Nigeria, the People's Republic of China former diplomatic relations began February 10 in 1971. The relationship between these two countries drew closer as a result of the international isolation and Western condemnation of the Nigerian military dictatorship in 1970s to 1998.
Nigeria has since become an important source of oil and petroleum for China's rapidly growing economy, and Nigeria is looking to China for help in achieving high economic growth. China has provided extensive economic, military and political support to Nigeria. In 2004 and again in 2006, Chinese President Hu Jintao made state visits to Nigeria and addressed a joint session of the National Assembly of Nigeria. Both nations signed a memorandum of understanding on establishing a strategic partnership. China has supported Nigeria's bid for a seat in the UN Security Council. As of February 2013, the Chinese ambassador in Nigeria is Deng Bogwing.
The Nigerian bilateral trade with China reached $3 billion in 2006 from $384 million in 1998. During the visit of the Chinese President Hu Jintao in 2006, China was able to secure 4 oil drilling licenses and agreed to invest $4 billion in oil and infrastructural development projects in Nigeria.
Both nations agreed to a 4-point plan to improve bilateral relations, a key component of which was to expand trade and investment in agriculture, telecommunications, energy and infrastructure development. Furthermore, China agreed to buy a controlling stake in Kaduna Oil Refinery that would produce 110,000 barrels per day. Nigeria also promised to give preference to Chinese oil firms for contracts for oil exploration in Niger Delta and Chad Basin. In 2006, China also agreed to grant a loan of $1 billion to Nigeria to help it upgrade and modernize its railway networks. In 2005, Nigeria agreed to supply petrol to China with 30,000 barrels of oil per day for $800 million.
The need to protect China's increased investment in Africa have driven a shift away from China's non-interference in the internal matters of other countries to new diplomatic and military initiatives to settle the unrest in Sudan and Mali.
Increasingly, concerns have been raised by Africans as well as outside observers that China's relationship with Africa is neo-colonialist in nature. As a response to such criticism, China issued the 9 principles to encourage and standardize enterprises overseas investment, a charter and guide of conduct to Chinese companies operating abroad. The China-Zimbabwe relationship drew the attention of such critics. China was accused of supplying Zimbabwe with jet fighters, vehicles and other military equipment. China declared in 2007 that it was dropping all kinds of assistance and limiting assistance to humanitarian aid. In July 2008, the Chinese diplomacy asked Mugabe to behave, though critics see that as a way for China to protect its own interest in this country should a regime change. Other criticisms over China and African relationship have been there since time immemorial and now.
Over the years, there are varieties of critical perspective scrutinizing the Chinese role in the relationship, focused on balance of power relationship and human rights among African countries.
In July 2019, UN ambassadors of 37 countries, including Algeria, Angola, Cameroon, Congo, DRC, Egypt, Eritrea, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, Zimbabwe and other African states have signed a joint letter to UNHRC defending China's treatment of other Muslim minority groups in the Xinjiang region. The recent mistreatment of Africans in Guangzhou shows the different priorities of local and central politics in China. The Guangzhou municipal government faces unprecedented pressure to stop a second wave of coronavirus. Due to this, all African nations tend to turn their back over China.
Alright viewers, this brings us to the end of today's show. Please, for those who have not subscribed to this great channel, don't forget to click on the subscription button and the notification bell to get updates from Nebo TV. See you next time.